Hello everyone, in this video I will talk about the most common mistakes that could lead to US visa refusal. If you are applying for B1 B2 visa and if you don't want to make the same mistake, make sure to watch this video. This is going to be a very informative video. Let us start. But before I start, let me give you a little brief about B1 B2 visa. So the process is that first you fill your DS-160 visa application form, and after that you schedule your appointment for your US visa interview. So if you want to get your US visa, you need to make sure that you are doing these two things correctly. Fill your DS-160 correctly and make sure that you prepare well for the interview, because your interview is very important. When you appear for your interview, remember that in the mind of the visa officer, he is thinking that you are potential immigrant, which means that you have an intention to permanently settle in United States. So this is again one of the most common visa refusal reason. The visa officer thinking that you will settle in United States. The visa officer thinking that you will not return back to your home country. And this is the reason that the visa officer will give you most probably section 214B. This simply means that you will not return back to your country and you will settle in United States. What should you do to prove to the visa officer that you don't have intention to settle in United States, that you are going there just as a tourist and you will return back to your home country? We are going to be talking about those reasons in this video. Second concern that the visa officer has is that if you don't have sufficient fund with you, how are you going to finance your trip? So you need to convince the visa officer that your financial situation is good and you will be able to pay for your trip in United States. Having talked about these two reasons, now let me talk about in little more detail what could be the reason for your visa refusal. Say you have a weak tie to your home country. What do I mean by weak ties to home country? For example, let us say I'm an Indian and I'm 23 years of age, I'm not married, I am not working, I'm not studying. What does this suggest? This simply means that my connection to my home country is not that strong, because say if I have family in my home country, if I have employment, if I have properties, land, investment, these things connect me to my home country. In the absence of those things, it suggests that you have weak ties to your home country, and there could be a possibility that if you get your US visa, you will not return back to your home country. So, if you're unemployed, unmarried, have weak family ties, not part of any community, any group in your home country, and if you don't have any investment, any properties, if your financial situation is not good, these things are big no-no for the visa officer, because if these are the case, he'll think that you may settle in United States. So you want to make sure, if you want to get your US visa, that you have a strong ties to your home country. To assess whether you have a strong home ties or whether you have weak home ties, the visa officer will ask you different questions. The visa officer can ask you questions on your employment. The visa officer can ask you question about your family. The next reason for your visa refusal could be that you have not filled your DS-160 properly. So what I mean when I say that not fill your DS-160 properly. So when you fill your DS-160, they ask you a lot of questions. They ask you questions about your employment. They ask you question about your education. You need to fill your educational details. They ask you question about your plans to United States. When do you want to visit United States? For example, they ask you about any tentative plans you have, and you tell them like if you want to visit in Feb or March, and you tell them the place that you want to visit, like New York or anything. So the important thing to keep in mind is that when you fill your DS-160, fill it correctly, update all the details, and remember what you are filling. Because when you go to the interview, there should not be any inconsistencies in your answer in the interview and your application. Because when the visa officer asks you where are you going, and you tell him you are going to Florida, and if he looks at your application, your DS-160, and if he sees that you have mentioned NY previously, so this is an inconsistent response. So your answer in DS-160 and your response that you are giving to visa officer, they should be aligned. There should not be any inconsistencies. So my suggestion, my advice, whatever you have mentioned in DS-160, remember everything. Another refusal reason could be that the visa officer can think that your application is incomplete, or if he wants some documents, he can ask you for those documents. So under this section 221G, if any essential information is missing from an application, then your visa could be refused. but they will give you a chance. If you provide them with the documents, your visa could again be granted. The next refusal reason could be purpose of visit. So this is very important. This is, in my opinion, the most important question that the visa officer is going to ask you. So if there is only one question that you are going to prepare, make sure that this is the one, because in most situations, this is the first question that the visa officer asks you. So if you start your visa interview, the visa officer will ask you, what is your purpose of visit? You tell him your purpose of visit, and then depending on the answer to this question, he'll ask you follow-up question. For example, if you're going there to visit your family, then the visa officer will ask you questions on your family, your funds. If you're going there to attend trainings, then the visa officer will ask you about your work, your employment. He'll ask you where you are going. So make sure that you give an answer to this question in such a way that it clears most of the doubts of the visa officer. Because remember that he does not have a lot of time. The interviews are generally 1 to 3 minutes short. And in that 1 to 3 minutes, he has to decide whether he wants to give you your visa or not. So you need to convince him that you are going there for genuine reason. So this is your opportunity to convince the visa officer that you are going for a genuine reason. For example, when he asks you what is your purpose of visit and you are just mentioning tourism, do you think he's going to give you your visa? Because you are not doing anything to convince him that you are a genuine visitor. So you should answer to him something like this: I'm planning a trip to Disney World in Florida. And if you're going for a family visit, mention something like this: I'm going to attend an engagement of my brother who lives in, say, New York, and I will be going in the month of March, and I will be staying for 2 weeks. So when you answer in this way, it gives the visa officer some details, and you are doing your bit to convince the visa officer that you are not a potential immigrant. So he may grant you your US visa. Next reason for your US visa refusal could be lack of fund. Again, I've talked about this earlier as well. If you don't have sufficient fund, how are you going to finance your trip? So to check whether you have sufficient fund or not, the visa officer can ask you about your employment. So he can ask you that where are you working? He can directly ask you about your fund if he has concern that you don't have sufficient fund. Now that I have talked about the most common reason for visa refusal, there are other reasons for refusal as well. Your length of stay. So let me give you one example. Let us say that you are going to US to attend one conference, and the conference is of 2 days. But in your application, in your DS-160, you have mentioned that you are going to be in US for 3 months. So this can raise suspicion in the mind of the US visa officer, and this is a red flag. So he can refuse your visa. So it is advisable that if you are going there for the first time, mention 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Second reason for refusal is fraud and misrepresentation. So you should not mention any details in your DS-160, or you should not answer anything in your interview that is not correct. So all your information should be correct. You should not omit any information. You should not fake any information. So next reason for your refusal could be health reasons. If you have some contagious disease, you are not eligible to get this visa. Again, they could give you some security reasons that you are not eligible for US visa. If you have a criminal background, you may not be eligible for US visa. Having talked about all the reasons why your US visa could get refused, let me give you some tips. First tip will always be like fill your DS-160 correctly. That is the most important thing. In my mind, that is 80% of your task. Your interview is just 20%. Build a strong profile. So when I talk about build a strong profile, what I mean is that have a strong ties to your home country. Have some investment, some properties. You should be employed, or you should be running a business. So these things strengthen your ties to your home country. And if you have good ties to your home country, if you have sufficient fund, you will most likely get the US visa. Another thing that could add to your profile is if you have a good travel history. So if you have traveled to multiple countries in the past, your chances of getting US visa is very high. So if you want to get your US visa, start traveling. And Again, I have mentioned fill your DS-160 correctly. This is again in my mind the most important thing. And when you go for your US visa interview, be polite, be confident. And one last thing that I want to add, if you are going to US to attend trainings, make sure that you have a letter from your employer. If you are going to US for conference, make sure you to have a letter from the event organizer, because in situations like these, especially if you are going for trainings, the visa officer can ask you about a letter. Like if you have a letter from your employer, if you have a letter from the person who is organizing the event, because he asked me, the visa officer asked me for the letter. So in most cases, the visa officer will not ask for any documents, but in situations like these, especially trainings and things related to that, the visa officer can ask you for the letter. So if that is the case, make sure to have a letter from your employer. If you like my content, please subscribe my channel. Thank you so much.